All right, so our primary measure that we're going to use to measure inequality, we're going to do two things. So we're going to use something called a Lorenz curve, which is what I'm going to show you in this video. We're going to use a Lorenz curve to represent inequality visually. And then we're going to use something called the Gini Index, which is going to be calculated from this Lorenz curve to give a numerical representation, a numerical index of inequality. Okay, so how does this Lorenz curve work? Well, on the bottom we have the different groups of people. So from 10% of the people, 20%, 30%, 40%, and so on, up to 1.0 is the proportion. You can say proportion of people if you want. So the first one is 10% and so on. And then on the vertical axis, we have the proportion of income that each group is holding. So 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%, and so on. Okay. This blue line is the 45-degree line, and that is equality. This is the equality line. So along that line, the percentage of people and the percentage of income are equal. So the first 10% of people own 10% of the income. The second 10% own 10% more, and so on. Okay, so that's the idea of that. And so our graph is going to show, well, the further away we are from that visually, then the further we are from being equal. Okay, on the right-hand side, I have some data, and this is data divided into deciles. So the deciles are, each one of these groups is 10% of the population. And then it shows how much does each group share of the total income. Okay, total income for the country, how much is shared by each group. And then what we have to do to finish this is get the cumulative share. So let's go ahead and do that part real quick. So the first group, which is 10% of the population, has 2% of the total. And then the cumulative share, the next group has 3% plus the 2% before them, so that becomes 5. I'm just going to leave off the decimals. And then the next group gets 4% for themselves, plus the two groups before them got 5, so now we're up to 9%. So what we're doing is we're adding how much does this group share plus all the groups before them. This is what you call a cumulative distribution. And then the 9%, well, this group gets 5% themselves. So this is the next 10% of people. Well, they get 5% themselves, and the groups before them got 9% total. So now we're up to 14% total. And then we continue on 6%. So this up to 20% total. So half of the people control only 20% of the income. Okay, that's what we're up to. And then we keep on going. Now you can kind of see the pattern. So maybe I can stop explaining. Okay. And so at the end, we end up at 100%. All right. So now we got to go ahead and graph this. And I will graph it. I'll use green. Okay, so then for each of these groups, and it's going to be very approximate because my scale is not all that great, but for each of these groups, we're going to graph this. What we're graphing is the cumulative share. So we're graphing the cumulative share, and it's going to show how much did that group and all the groups before them make. So we've organized the groups in terms of how much they make. So the first group of 10% of the people makes only 2% of the incomes. That's around 2%. And then the next group makes 3% more, so we add 3% to that, so this gives us to our 5%. And then when we add in the third group, we get up to 9% because they made 4% more. And then we add the next group, now we're up to 14%. Okay, so a little less than half of that. And the fifth group, we're up to 20%, and so on. And we just continue. So then we get up to, then we get up to 29%, and a little higher. And then we get up to 39%, so nearly 40. And then we put the 80, we get up to half. So you notice it starts out really flat, and that's because each of those groups is controlling very little income, getting very little income. And then eventually it becomes steep, and eventually we end up here. Okay, and now we just play connect the dots. Okay, so we just connect these dots, this one up, and how much they go up each time shows what percentage of income that group got. Okay, and so then we have our Lorenz curve, and the Lorenz curve is easy to interpret. The further away it is from the 45-degree line, so the bigger, I'll call this A, I'll call this area A. The bigger A is, the more unequal it is. Okay, So that's the interpretation of this. So we can see it visually. The steeper the line is in some portion, that means the bigger share of income they got because it's a steeper slope, right? So they only moved 10% of the people, and but they got a big percentage of income. And then the flatter it is in a certain spot means the less share those groups are getting of income. So if it was totally flat, that would mean that group got zero income, right? That group got zero income. And then we're going to use, so that's our interpretation of our Lorenz curve. I'll show some examples a little bit later. And then let me label a B here. Okay, so actually I'll put it red. So then our thing called our Gini Index, which I'll show numbers on later, is just going to be this ratio. So if we were as equal as possible, then the blue line and the green line would be exactly the same, and A would be 0. Okay. And if we were as unequal as possible, then the green line would go all the way to, I don't want to draw it and mess it up, but maybe I can draw it. Then the green line would go all the way to here because they get 0 income. And just the last person gets all the income. And so this whole thing would be inside our green line. The whole thing would be A. Okay, so that's the biggest it can be. So our Gini index is just compare A to the whole area, A plus B. Okay, so the bigger it is, the more unequal, and the less it is, the less unequal, the more equal. And this goes between 0 and 1. Okay, so this is our Gini index. So our Lorenz curve gives us a visual of this, and then our Gini index gives us a specific number that we can use. All right, so we'll go ahead and I'll show some other calculation videos that are optional, and then then we'll talk about this in more detail.